because the former Premier here, he probably thinks that having the CFMEU is, a really good idea to build the infrastructure for the Commonwealth Games. You might like to put him straight. That'd be good.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks very much for having me, Peter. So I wrote about last week some industrial strife and chaos on the site of the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games Stadium. So it wasn't actually a typical strike. CFMEU used an entitlement under their enterprise agreement, and it's a standard entitlement under most CFMEU EBAs. And it entitles the union to hold two-hour daily union communication meetings. Now, the purpose of these meetings is for the union to communicate with its workforce, particularly with respect to safety issues and that type of thing. But the union, over the course of nearly 3 weeks, used it to basically bring work on the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games Stadium site to a halt. And the unions have now been exposed in the federal court and also by the media. The meetings were exposed to be basically an absolute sham. There's photographs, there's videos of construction workers napping, sitting reading in hammocks, playing sport, barbecues, that type of thing. And the really dangerous thing when it comes to a vital public infrastructure project like the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games Stadium is it really brings into question our ability as a nation, I guess, to cost effectively and efficiently construct public infrastructure. Yeah. And the really, I guess the damning thing is it's now been revealed in the federal court that the purpose for holding these meetings, which actually drove down productivity to less than 90 minutes a day while all the workers remained on full pay, it was actually to exact a pay rise that would see tradies in the future under the CFMEU earning upwards of $150,000 a year. So that's close to double what the award rate would mandate. So it was basically, I guess, holding...
Did you have any sense from the federal court what the judge said of or what he said and what his views were or the facts associated with that particular case?
Yeah, certainly, Peter. So Justice Reeves made the remark, I can't remember the precise wording, but it was something to the effect of Hansen Yunkin, the head contractor, if they didn't want this type of chaos, if they didn't want the unions to use those meetings, why did they include them in the wage agreement to begin with? Now, the reality is that a lot of head contractors and tier 1 contractors like Hansen Yunkin that end up tendering for government work effectively feel like they have no choice, because if they don't sign on to the union mandated EBA, they might fall into conflict or they might face intimidation, further boycotts from the CFMEU, and for some evidence of that, there's currently over 100 CFMEU officials before the courts charged with over 1,000 indictments. So they call it buying industrial peace for a reason, and particularly when it's an infrastructure project and it's the taxpayers that end up shouldering the cost. Yeah. It's a very easy decision to make to basically sign up and, I guess, avoid them confronting the strife themselves.
Would you be able to give us any idea of the sort of costs associated with these long and continuing games, basically, at the CFMEU as part of a broader attack on the employer to get some more money out of them, squeeze them, as you say, ultimately to the ratepayers? So just in that particular instance, though, was there any sense of the amount of money that would have been perhaps lost just in that one small case?
Yeah, certainly. So the delays, it's come out now in court proceedings, cost the head contractor $700,000 alone. Now, I believe that that's a penalty clause that was included in their initial contract. But there's plenty of ways you can count the cost. A really interesting example is one of the tollways in Melbourne. Because of delays, if you looked at the toll revenue alone as a result of it opening months later because of CFMEU antics, the toll revenue foregone was upwards of $20 million. Probably the most egregious recent example is the Victorian desalination plant, where it's been estimated by a lot of industry experts the total rorts, the total cost overruns exceeded $2.6 billion, which is an obscene amount of money.
Yeah. John, just moving on to other things, what's your view? I mean, obviously the federal government now has to work out whether they're going to put the ABCC legislation to a joint sitting. Yeah. And that was the basis of calling the election. What's your view on that legislation? Do you support it? I mean, I know HR Nicholls Society supports a deregulated industrial environment, and we may have our differences on that, but I respect your right to have that view, even though I don't agree with it. But so what's your view about the ABCC, John? Do you think that's important in terms of resolving these issues, or do you see it over-regulation?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. I think it's critical. I've recently done a lot of research on the ABCC and its previous period of operation, and one thing that kept coming up is those compulsory powers to compel testimony are absolutely critical at getting down to the mischief that can happen. So I guess there's a sort of cultural problem in the construction industry where people don't want to be seen to be ratting on misconduct. They don't want to be seen to be the person dobbing someone in. And the powers are comparable to ASIC, to a Royal Commission, to the Australian Taxation Office. And I think the proof is absolutely in the results. Since the ABCC was replaced by the toothless Fair Work Building and Construction Commission, the days lost to industrial action in the construction industry alone have gone up by something 2.5 times. It's more than doubled. The instances of lawlessness have absolutely increased, and the Fair Work Building and Construction Commission, you only need to scroll through its successful prosecutions, how long it actually takes to bring a successful prosecution in the federal courts to know that this body is poorly equipped to deal with the types of lawlessness that we're seeing in the construction industry.
Yeah.
So when you say poorly equipped, John, do you mean it doesn't have the power, or it doesn't have the resources, or it doesn't have both?
I would argue that the powers to compel testimony are absolutely critical. As for the culture within the Fair Work Building and Construction Commission, I don't possibly have a view on that necessarily, but if you observe, I guess, the time lapse between the instances occurring and when you see successful prosecutions, it's often months later, by which time the waste, the loss of productivity has already occurred. So I think it's really important. Actually, probably one of the most critical things about the restored ABCC is the increased penalties. So I mentioned previously, Hanson Yunkin already has lost about $700,000 as a result of the sham meetings at the Commonwealth Games Stadium. I think the maximum penalty a CFMEU office bearer will face if they're found to be guilty of breaching the law in that case, it's less than $20,000, which is not necessarily deterrent of the magnitude that we would like. I think if you look at the ABCC, those penalties more than double, and that in conjunction with the Registered Organisations Bill will mean individual office bearers can be banned if they can be banned from ever holding office again in a trade union if they're repeat offenders. And most importantly, there's actually a statutory prohibition on them receiving any financial aid paying those fines. So if they're going to incite industrial chaos, they'll be paying through their hip pockets, which is a very important deterrent that we think is much needed.
Certainly is. Can I just ask you whether you've had any chance to either speak to or read or otherwise what some of those crossbenchers might be doing? I think it was Mr. Roberts, is it, or Malcolm Roberts, is it?
One Nation
one of the
Senator,
One
yeah,
Nation
Roberts.
crowd. Do you think we might persuade them to do the right thing on some of this? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. So I had a great conversation with Malcolm Roberts today. He's actually a long-standing member of the HR Nicholls Society, and he told me he's a proud member today. He kept mum on what he's planning to do with the ABCC, but he said that he will be taking a thoroughly evidence-based approach. He says he wants all the relevant department briefings, which is an eminently sensible point of view as a newly elected senator. I think the Senate crossbench is a mixed bag, but we may be pleasantly surprised. We don't have Glenn Lazarus anymore, who was bankrolled by the CFMEU. So from my point of view, that's definitely a net gain.
Yep.
And we don't know what the two Xenophon senators are going to do as well. They don't really have much of a track record of commentary or decision making. So we'll wait and see, but I'm quietly optimistic.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's great to have one of the younger ones coming in to take on these issues, and I hope some of our new ones coming into the federal parliament will take the same attitude as John here.
Well, John, I always support young, enthusiastic Queenslanders, regardless of whether I agree with them or not. So good luck in the new role, John.
Thanks very much, Peter. That's very kind of you.
Okay, good luck.
Thanks for having me.